and now we all want to go, and so I will take a long time. But one of the things that happened today is the death of K.C. Sathyamurthy. Very, very important figure in Andhra Pradesh. One of my complaints about the academic studies in Andhra Pradesh is that very little is known about Andhra Pradesh outside. There are many struggles and long historical traditions, and in fact, very, very long democratic traditions in this state. Because of this problem of language, like Suraleka was speaking, it's very difficult to communicate because of the language, and so that is one of the real problems in the case of Andhra Pradesh. Really suffered primarily because most of the youth in Andhra Pradesh, they went into IT and engineering, other kinds of sectors, and they were not got into academia, they were not got into the camera, they were not got into the other kinds of areas where I think it has the visibility to the intellectual culture of this place. Because Sathyamurthy represents more than one generation, because he was somebody born in the parties, was part of the old Communist Party, undivided Communist Party. He was part of the Communist Party that led the Telangana armed struggles, and then he was part of the Maoist movement, the ML movement, the People's War, was one of the founders of People's War in the 80s. Then in the 90s, again, like a very young man, he was part of the Ambedkarite movement, he was part of the Dalit movement, he was part of producing a Krishnamaya, he was part of producing a Gautam, and many other younger writers. If you look at his collection of poetry, recently I had a occasion to look at, because to rectify this whole problem of non-representation to Andhra Pradesh, we were editing a small collection of Dalit writing. There are trying to look at collection of poetry, which is from the 60s to the 70s to the present, which was edited by, in fact, interestingly, by one of our students, Sitaram. Sitaram edited this collection some time back. I didn't know. Recently, I was asking for something, so I came across this book. This book really shows you his own kind of early kind of writing for the last 30-40 years, and also after the 90s, how he reinvents himself as a very important Dalit poet. But in fact, if you look at, I'm saying that it's that we don't know a lot about these people outside, because Devsagar, and he wrote in the name of Devsagar. He's known as Devsagar, he's known as Sathyamurthy, he's known as Excel. So because he was a leader of the party, he was a founding member of the People's War along with Pandita Sitaramaiah, but he was also a poet. So one of the Telugu critics was writing in that book saying that K.C. Sathyamurthy or Devsagar is next to Sri only. Sri, I don't know whether you know this about Sri also, Sri tragedy. Sri is one of the modern Telugu poets, and he is like the poet of Andhra Pradesh. If you consider comparing the other kinds of figures and other partners, this is a very, very highly recognized, well-known modern poet, modern in terms of not only writing about revolution, writing in a kind of idiom which is new, writing in free verse for the first time, so breaking many kind of traditions. So he is applauded, and also from modern to being a revolutionary kind of a writer. So he is in some sense kind of upheld as a very important poet of Andhra Pradesh. So in fact, this critic was saying that next to Sri Devsagar is one of the Telugu poets, because he has really kind of shaken the whole generation of young people. So what he did was, Sri was only writing in the free verse, was only writing modern poetry, was only following Eliot, following maybe Arden, following all those kinds of new kinds of poets. But what Devsagar did was, because he was also a man who went to the tribals, who went and lived in the forest, who had a long underground life, about 40-50 years. He had experience of working in the earlier Communist Party and so on. So he has mastered the art of writing songs. If you think of today, in any meeting in Andhra Pradesh, you have this very popular ballad songs, Gadar. Many of the Gadar songs you don't know are songs by Devsagar. But I'll ask you, there is somebody who can sing Devsagar songs. Many of the songs of Gadar, many of the songs of Janmati Mandali, many of the songs of all the ML movement are Devsagar songs. Devsagar writing hundreds of songs, following Derrida, following all kinds of, and he has a kind of world outlook in terms of, he has read all revelation earliest poets in the world, who has been writing kind of continuously and is written several collections which are all there in that small book. So in that sense, we really don't know about such kind of a figure and he really moved whole generations of people to become Naxalites. If you think of the guy's own contribution in terms of turning hundreds of people to Naxalites, he was one such example. And he was an ordinary teacher, ordinary student, and who turned out to be such an influential and important figure. But the only one aspect that I want to talk about today is this aspect of you would like to be a general leader of the society. You would like to be an intellectual of the society. So you would like to be a poet of the society. But how you finally end up being a poet? Finally end up being somebody who would look after your own people. So this is one of the strategies in the life of many of the intellectuals, including Ambedkar. So that is the connection that I am trying to make. If you think of Chitralekha, so what was Chitralekha saying? Chitralekha was saying that there are family problems, but she wanted to, she married somebody outside the caste, she married a OBC person. So she would like to be like any other normal citizen of this country. She would like to exercise her right to marry someone who live in this society. But there is a lot of problems. The society doesn't allow you to be a normal citizen. Because you are born in this caste, you cannot marry somebody outside the caste. Problems begin there. Then what else was like? Because you have to earn some living, so she wants you to drive an auto. And because this auto driving is male domain, and auto driving is also left domain, and CHV is a kind of left domain. So CHV, auto driving, all these are male domains, and those domains do not allow this woman to function. So she would like to be like any other normal citizen and earn a living by doing whatever she could. So she could drive the auto like any other person, but they don't allow her to do that. So what was he saying? Finally, she ended up doing her own caste profession, weaving. So this is the story of the Dalit intellectuals in this country, Dalit people in this country, that you would like to be normal, you would like to lead the society, you would like to be a visitor like Ambedkar, but finally he reduced that, so he is somebody who fought for untouchable, somebody who introduced reservation, somebody who is weaving. So this woman is a Dalit woman, a Pulaya woman who is weaving, who doesn't know anything else. So similarly, someone like Banwari Devi, what was she doing? He was basically saying that the early marriages are wrong, child marriages are wrong, some of these practices in the villages are wrong. She would like to be leader of the village. She would like to be an example of modernization. But what is the feudal Jats are doing? So they raise her, they try to kill her, finally they do all kinds of things. And Supreme Court says something that is really shocking. So this is one of the important kind of tragedies of modern intellectual life. So if we come to Ambedkar, then I was saying deeply, and Appa also rightly pointed out that point, that there are two kinds of interesting contributions for Ambedkar. One is the constitutional, legal reservations, these rights, and the institutional mechanisms, arrangement for that people. We are going to get independent. This is going to be a new society. In independent India, we have to ensure certain kind of safeguards for these people. Otherwise, Gandhi, Congress, dominant sections, they will eat up these people. They will suppress these people. They will not allow them to come to the public. Not only setting up a beach class in Osmania, but they will not allow them to enter Osmania. So given this, Ambedkar said we really have to have some kind of mechanisms. So there was this pragmatic aspect of Ambedkar. By 1930s, he realized that we should be pragmatic, and that is where he made all these constitutional provisions in the Constitution. And in fact, he argued, he represented, he talked to many committees, he wrote many documents, including states and minorities, where he outlined his position. And one of the important points he was making is that Dalits in this country, untouchables in this country, are more than a minority. Minorities have certain kind of disadvantage, but they are more than a minority because they suffer more than a minority. They suffer also because of social stigma and unsecurity and so on. They are more than a minority. And they are not recognized as people with any human worth, value, and they have to be reduced to, like I was reduced to doing weaving their own caste formation. They are not allowed to rise beyond their point because there is certain kind of understanding in which you have to be ghettoized. You have to be confined to your ghetto and you are not allowed to go out. And Sajamurthy, for example, he was trying to be revolutionary. In fact, I was talking to one of the younger activist who was inspired by Satyamurthy in the 90s. Because 90s, whole lot of Dalit youth thought Satyamurthy came out, he had an excellent background, and he will throughout some organizations, he will try to fight the upper caste and all Dalit youth banks and all that. So he was saying that he always dreamt that he is a revolutionary and he is going to bring revolution. Like Spring Surrender is going to come out Andhra Pradesh and so on. But what happened finally? He was reduced to be a Dalit intellectual, reduced to be a Dalit party spokesman, and finally today we remember him mostly maybe as a Dalit. So if no ML party today would actually claim him as one of the founders of this movement, they would not. So finally he was reduced to be ordinary Dalit intellectual. So he is not somebody who is thinking of new Andhra Pradesh or new India on the lines of China, on the lines of South India. So these are the streams of these people. And similarly, the Ambedkar strategy is that he has to pragmatically argue that certain rights within this constitution. So on the other hand, he has another agenda. The other agenda which goes beyond modernity, as you would say, goes beyond making India modern in terms of legal, constitutional, educational provision. So he is also thinking of much more transformative modern kind of project, which is a project which is not realized. It is a project there is no way that we see that today. So this is a project where if you want to track that, it is through his writings, starting from Annihilation of Caste. In Annihilation of Caste, what was he saying? He was not saying Dalits are oppressed, you give them rights. He was saying it's a Hindu society, it's a Brahminical society, you have to reform this society. If you believe in democracy, if you want a modern India, it has to be different kind of India. If it has to be different kind of India, you really have to see why there is a serious problem in this country. So you have untouchability, you have caste, and untouchability, caste are based on Hinduism. So unless you rethink Hinduism, unless you reform Hinduism, and unless you destroy Hinduism, there is no possibility of any democracy. The way that you are defining Hinduism today, the way that you are arguing about Hinduism today, so there is a serious problem. There is a serious problem that within this kind of framework, there is no guarantee of democracy. There is no guarantee of equality. There is no guarantee of fraternity. So given this, Ambedkar is saying that you really think of annihilation of caste. Why caste is a problem for him? Caste is a problem not because that Dalits are not getting rights. That is one issue. They are denied of rights, they are denied of livelihood, denied of many other things, denied of right to work, denied of right to political activity. All those are there. But he is also saying that caste as an institution is an anti-democratic institution. So you are saying that you are going to build democratic India. If you want to build democratic India in a democracy, communication is essential, interaction is essential, community is important, essential, fraternity is important. So if you are not able to talk to somebody, if you are not able to drink water with somebody, if you are not able to eat with somebody, if you are not able to marry who you want, if you are not able to marry OBC, if you are not able to drive an auto, if you are not able to do all these things, then where is democracy? So you think that caste is a serious problem because of this. Caste is a problem because Chandralekha cannot drive this auto. Caste is a problem because Satyamurthy cannot be an intellectual of the country. Caste is a problem. Ambedkar cannot be a theoretician of democracy. He can only be a Dalit intellectual. So Ambedkar is saying that if you really believe in modern democratic India, so you really have to rethink. And who is saying this? He was talking to the Hindus. He was talking to the reformist Hindus in Punjab. He was saying this. And similarly, if you come to the later part, when he realized that there is independence is coming, so he wrote the States and Minorities. States and Minorities is a text within his own constitution. In fact, Indian constitution is not Ambedkar constitution. Indian constitution is a document that he negotiated with other people. Negotiated with the most powerful dominant section, negotiated with what our Kaka would call the reason, argument, and he would win over to certain extent, and he would actually institutionalize certain provisions. But that is not his constitution, because the constitution recognizes right to property, recognizes many other aspects. But in that constitution, again, as you rightly pointed out, there was this section called directive principle. So directive principle is one area where you can really see Ambedkar's vision. But directive principles are not principles that you can enforce. They cannot be legally enforced. They are only those principles only tell you that the vision of Ambedkar. The vision of Ambedkar, which is unrealized, it is not implemented, it is not cared for by our government. So they don't want to implement anything in that particular way. So to supplement that, we have this states and minorities. So in the states and minorities, we have this agenda of nationalizing land, nationalizing wealth, and reading, and also again, Tata was actually saying all this when speaking, that he did not simply argue for equality very mechanically. Because there is a problem in India if you argue for equality. Because the language of equality is also appropriated with the upper caste. Like now the APP appropriated the language of science, appropriated the language of modernity. So the opposition to peace, they are not arguing on any traditional lines. They are exactly arguing on the scientific level. That sincerity is scientific, that so all those arguments, remember equality and tolerance. So in the university you are not supposed to eat, it will hurt the sentiment, and so on and so forth. They are actually invoking this kind of argument, equality argument. So as use for equality, of appropriate in our language, they still saying that we are arguing for equality. So that is the Ambedkar knew this problem very well. That if you argue for only equality, it is going to be a serious problem. You really have to recognize that first of all people are unequal. In an unequal society, you cannot argue blanket equality. You really have to first recognize what is inequality. So you have to really textualize those inequalities. So that is why Ambedkar was saying that the scheduled castes are more than a minority. First to recognize that they are not equal citizens. They are more than a minority. They are more than minorities, and then you have citizens. So how do you make them all equal? So you really have to have provisions for addressing all these people. It's a different section, and including women. You have to have a Hindu code bill, because certainly if you want to bring them and make them equal, so there is a certain route where you have to address certain serious kind of reforms. So Ambedkar was very clear that normatively arguing for equality will not help. You really have to argue both at the pragmatic level, and this is very important because many people call Ambedkar liberal and generally liberal legal kind of a person. So he was not actually liberal in that conservative sense. So he is somebody who was very pragmatic, who was also republican in that sense, who was also a certain kind of social revolutionary. So that happened because some scholars have pointed out that because though he was trying the liberal kind of tradition where all are equal before law, was tried in that kind of a tradition, and he thought in India everybody will be treated equal and so on. But he had personal experience of untouchability in this country, personal experience of discrimination in this country, personal experience of exclusion in this country. So that is one aspect. The personal experience made him not to reproduce the theory that he learned. He learned certain theories, but he realized that he cannot, as it is, implement those theories, because personal experience tells him that these doesn't work here. If you go and tell in a university, I am equal, you are equal, so they don't respect. They will tell people like that you do this. So he knows that even CIT will tell this, that you cannot drive this. So precisely because it's a different kind of society, he experienced that is one kind of a situation. So because of his experience, and then because of his also experience with Congress, with government, with the national movement, so Ambedkar really came up with a different kind of understanding, where normatively he was working at one level, pragmatically he was working at another level. So if you want to think of Ambedkar's agenda, you have to look at intellectual caste, you have to look at states and minorities, you have to look at directive principles, and finally you have to look at Buddha and Dhamma. Because obviously he thought there is a serious problem. Okay, one is the academic, political rights, then in terms of constitutional rights, then also at the social level there is certain kind of religious culture. India is essentially a religious and a cultural kind of society. So its own oppression is mediated to culture and religion. You really have to have a solution to that. So what was the intellectual, philosophical answer to this? In fact, the Osmania students are saying in the AVP that our answer is philosophical and political answer. We are not physically resorting like burning the bus and so on. We are answering philosophical. So this comes from Ambedkar, because Ambedkar really thought that he had to respond to the tradition of the Sankara, the tradition of the Brahminical tradition. Intellectually, philosophically, he had to reflect. So that is Buddha and Dhamma, where he said you really have to rethink of your own religious and social culture. So there is this transformative, modern and very democratic kind of agenda in Ambedkar, which is something that we all completely ignored and forgot. And this is something that really, if you are thinking of Ambedkar's vision of modern India, it is not just about that he argued for Dalits, they got reservations, and all these fellows are here, they created trouble, but he was actually arguing for the society. He is arguing for completely reorganizing the entire society. He is arguing for women, he is arguing for minorities, he is arguing for many other people. That is there, because he was a democratic in his thinking and his practice, he could really see through this connection. So in fact, the other point that Kaka was saying before I conclude in 2 more minutes is that, so what is this idea of modernity or modernization? It is also something that has to do with your own changing of yourself. So the challenge is not to challenge the dominant and challenge them and get your right, but also build some kind of a self-reflection that you really have to be self-critical. So this is where I think our university students particularly, it's important that you really have to take this challenge very seriously. If I see this university where you see one day one girl was collecting flowers at midnight at 1 o'clock. Some 3 days she was collecting. I said, oh, okay. So in this university, students can collect flowers at 1 o'clock in the night. Then some boys and girls will be playing the shuttle. I said, at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, and so on and so forth. Morning 6 o'clock I was coming from work. Some girl was kind of working on the computer on the laptop in the garden. So what I am saying is that there is certain kind of freedom you experience. You don't have to think of morning breakfast, what happens, what will happen to the child, and what to earn, nothing. Absolutely free in the university. But that freedom also gives you a certain kind of challenge of changing yourself. If you don't want to change, if you don't want to be democratic, if you don't want to interact with other people on that place, if you think that you want to dominate and get your own right, enjoy. So I think that is something that you are not learning anything from Ambedkar. So Ambedkar also transformed himself drastically. And he really changed himself when he was talking to other kinds of people. So that is the other challenge of modernization. And whatever other differences. So that serious challenge you have to take into consideration, then only you will realize that there is some kind of unity. There is a meaning of what you call SC and OBC unity. Otherwise it becomes an empty kind of slope. So that is where I want to end with this example of the peace struggle. It's a very, very important, interesting kind of struggle, not in the cultural sense, in the political sense. It's a very important kind of struggle because it is a struggle that helps maybe to build certain kind of unity among the oppressed community. It's a certain kind of identity that it really provides. And it is also importantly political because historically there is this one argument that these communities are completely useless. They have no resources, they are untouchable, unseen, they have contributed nothing. So they have to give up everything that they have been brought up. They have to give up all their practices, food practices, cultural practices, social practices. They have to become completely something new. So this is the assumption that we have always worked with. But here is a challenge now. Some of these communities wanted to recognize what is called self-worth, what is called human worth. So we are also human beings. We have dignity. We have culture. We have our own tradition. We have our own practices, and which should very well be part of modernity. It should very well be part of our university. These are not personal and so on. In fact, what are the other arguments that they are advancing? The argument by the other groups, the AFP and other kind of groups, are in terms of if you eat beef, but one person was arguing on TV yesterday, that actually makes your brain dumb, and also it makes you cruel. So if you want to think of all violence in the society because you are eating beef and meat. So if you eat vegetarian food, there is no violence in the society. So we know that there was this Gandhi message, they used to be there, and this is the same fellows who have demolished it, and they eaten all vegetables and they ate it. And the same fellows have done this in Gujarat 2002. In Narendra Modi, they have been eating vegetables and they are doing so. This is something which has nothing to do. So this is nothing to do with the vegetables. This is nothing to do with the vegetables or beef. So my point is about that the very fact that you don't want to recognize a section of people as equal. Even today, you don't want to recognize that there are a section of people and they have certain rights and they are human beings. You still want to hold on to your own idea that you are superior and you will decide what one should eat. But the real challenge is in terms of they want to decide what is to be cooked and what is to be eaten, what is normal, what is good, what is healthy, what doesn't lead to cruelty, what is nutritious. So they tell us that vegetarian is nutritious. The whole point is about whether beef is nutritious or vegetarian is nutritious. That's not my point. My point is that you don't have right to decide. You don't have bloody right to decide that you don't decide. You don't have right to decide. And we don't want to listen to your arguments. We don't want to listen to your arguments that we perpetuate cruelty. We perpetuate uninstability. We don't want to listen to these arguments because we have seen through these arguments. And when complete different, what are the other arguments that is hurt the center? And it hurts the center.